Welcome to the broadcast, my fruits. I'm looking extra fruity today. I want you to know that I do realise how ridiculous I look. And you might not believe it, but when I went to pull this look together for the broadcast, I thought, I'm going to keep it quite sober. I found this wonderful silk jacket yesterday, which I will show you later in Tip Jar Corner. We have a Tip Jar Corner today, and there are timestamps in the description box if you wish to skip ahead. A nice cosy Tip Jar Corner, but I loved this jacket. But I thought the jacket will do the talking, we will keep it to that, and the rest of it will be a very sober look. But as usual, one gets carried away. I thought, oh, I'll just try this bit of lip liner here, and oh, something's missing on the head. Oh, I've got a red fascinator I haven't used. And 5 minutes later, da-da, we have this sort of dressing up box affair. Well, you know, the dressing up box was one of the first loves of my life. It really was. That's where I spent most of my childhood, delving into the dressing up box and having fun. And well, here I am as a grown-up, and that is what I enjoy. It makes it fun for me. So usually you indulge me, and I'm sure you'll continue to. I will try and tone it down in future for a few looks, perhaps more towards the autumn and the winter. But for summertime, one gets a little bit gay and a little bit fruity, tutti frutti. So that's just the way it goes, my dear. That is just the way it goes, but I know that some of you will appreciate it. Catherine has been knocking it out of the park, as usual, at Wimbledon, where she brought the children today for the men's final. It was Princess Charlotte's first ever Wimbledon. Charlotte is 8 years old, Prince George is 9, and Charlotte was wearing a blue floral dress by Freaky, a Spanish brand, I believe, and Catherine dazzled in emerald by Roland Moret. Charlotte was making friends with the doggies and the pooches, and there were so many handshakes. These poor children have to shake hands again and again and again and again, but they're getting the gist of it. Quite a few people are commentating on Prince George's height, because he's coming up this spring shoot, isn't he? Coming up, as is Charlotte. Well, they all are. William will certainly go on to make a dashing and strapping monarch, and it looks like Prince George might follow in his tall footsteps. But they are all maturing really rather rapidly. But seeing Catherine in green, as she is the green goddess in emerald, it takes the mind back, doesn't it, to that Wimbledon adventure of 2019. And many people suspected that what was going on behind the scenes wasn't so rosy, and of course that was all confirmed in Spare. And it puts one in mind of when Meghan came along to Wimbledon in her white blousey number, and very gracefully she was sat in between Catherine and Pippa. She wasn't elbowed out, she wasn't made to be on the sideline. She was there, centre stage, gossiping with both of them, both of the ladies, the two young girls, bringing Meghan into their confidence royally. We don't have to pretend that we're besties, but bringing her into the confidence, trying to share a giggle, trying to have a good time. But now we know further details of what was really going on in Meghan's mind, because by that time, I believe, lip gloss gate had already happened. Can I use a smudge of lip gloss? No. So that had offended Meghan. And the ice queen of Catherine refusing to give me a hug as I leapt upon her, well, that had all taken place as well. So we all know now that Rachel was stewing inside. She was furious about this. And we can also see in Catherine's countenance that she had the measure of this woman. She knew what she was about by this time. And when you compare how relaxed she looks today with her children at Wimbledon and her family, you know there is less of that tension, less of the feeling, oh, I've got to tread on eggshells because nobody wants to offend Meghan and Harry. They take umbrage over absolutely everything in the world. Mind your step. It's like watching out for a landmine. You'd think it was Diana in Angola doing her charity work for landmines. You've got to be so careful about what you step on. And even if you are careful, you'll still set something off, some grenade that upsets them and offends them and gets the earth quaking. So she knew that she couldn't win with that girl, and you can see it on her face. What she didn't know was how royally she would be betrayed in the coming years, as she was. Well, as we can also see from these photographs, Meghan did not compare favourably to Catherine. And that is not, I'm not saying that to be mean. Meghan is a very attractive woman. taken separately from a woman like Catherine. You know, she's an average woman that photographs quite well sometimes. Other times she doesn't. And when you place her next to Catherine, she doesn't. And it doesn't favour her face or her figure. Now, as I say, there's nothing wrong with both of those things, but it obviously got to Meghan, and it got under her skin to be photographed with Catherine. She didn't like it. Of course, she couldn't tell herself why she didn't like it. That went into the subconscious, but she thought, I must never be photographed next to her again. That's another reason to leave the family, because it doesn't compare well, my dear. She never understood that in the royal family you are not attending a pageant. This is not some beauty contest. Plain is allowed. Plain is allowed in the royal family. It just so happens that Catherine happens to be a rave. It just so happens that Catherine happens to look like a supermodel. And even in her midsummer season, in her 40s, she's a vision of youthful, lithe radiance. You know, she is truly stunning. She gets better with age, and Meghan doesn't. And many people don't. So this is not supposed to be some critique of Meghan's appearance. It's simply to say that we understand that the jealousy crept in, because the photo tells it all. That snatched up ponytail next to Catherine's tresses obviously set alight some sort of competitive streak within Meghan, because ever since then we've seen the tresses come forth, haven't we, my dear? Rapunzel, Rapunzel. Let down the hair. That didn't compare favourably at all. But she was stewing away like a prickly cup of nettled tea, wasn't she, my dear? And she would serve that tea to Harry, pour the poison in his ear, and make sure they know when you're writing spare that all the other men in the royal family couldn't catch their breath when they met me. Big Willie has Catherine to salivate over, and trust me, my dear, she compares only favourably to the Duchess of Sussex. There is simply no comparison in that respect, or in any respect, to be quite honest with you, my dear. But Meghan looked on. She was green with envy when she saw Catherine in deep green, and Catherine was in deep green again today, and yesterday, for the women's final, when she gave out the Venus Rosewater dish, she wore a lighter green, a pale grassy green number with sunglasses. She looks so chic in the sunglasses. I love the way that she rocks those lunettes. And it was a rather emotional day. There were hugs galore. There were lots of celebrities in attendance. Billie Jean King, you know, tennis players of yours, Martina Navratilova, who I noticed was wearing a number a little bit like mine, one of those jackets. Don't you think? It put me in mind of my own number. She met with the ball boys and the ball girls, and who knows, probably some ball trans. All the letters of the alphabet were in attendance, I'm sure, with their balls. Or no balls. Ooh, it gets confusing, doesn't it, my dear? One can't keep up. But balls galore, and she chatted away. And actually, there were a few outings this week for the Wales family. They were at an air show earlier in the week, and it was very gloomy, rainy weather, actually. My kind of weather, as you know, dear. But they were treated to a day of jets, helicopters, and historic planes. And poor Louis, to be honest with you, he was looking a bit grumpy anyway. I got the feeling that there might have been tantrums and tiaras in the morning before all of the children left, and none of them looked especially pleased, but we can't expect them to be rays of joy at every moment. But poor Louis, there was some thundering noise at one moment, and the hands went to his ears, and he looked absolutely horrified, poor boy. They looked over a C-17 transporter aircraft that was used to transport the late Queen's coffin before her funeral. Catherine was lovely in this oatmeal-striped jacket and soggy toes. Their Majesties spent a day in Cornwall under engagements, and I do love Cornwall so very much, but I must say I always find it such a trek to get to. In the West Country, I would go more often if I could, because I really love it, and it's the quality of light that I adore, as well as the absolutely breathtaking scenery and nice people, but it is the quality of light. And don't you find that it is immediately recognisable, and you get this with various places everywhere, but certainly here in the kingdom, you can recognise that even when there's no scenery in the photograph, just by the light the light of the quality that's thrown. I always get that effect in Cornwall. It's a sort of freshness, whatever the weather is, and a feeling of open space. And they were there to take in many sites, including a museum and sculpture gardens. They met with the artistic community, young people. From the Tate Collective programme, they visited St Ives and St Cullum Major. At St Ives Harbour, they met coronation champions who were recognised earlier in the year for their outstanding voluntary contributions. And the Queen travelled alone to the Oasis Centre, a place that provides support to isolated and vulnerable people in a rural area of Cornwall. The centre supports people with mild to moderate mental health issues and is a resource for people and families who are supporting other people with dementia. And there's a well-being cafe there where everybody can get together and share stories and company and conversation. And she also went to the Women's Centre in Cornwall, a specialist support centre for women that have experienced all kinds of abuse. And I'm talking about real serious issues of abuse, Meghan. So no, you can't come. We're not talking about the so-called abuse that you suffered at the hands of this nasty nation and the press. No, because that was all sophistry. Some glorious photographs of Prince William when he visited Wistman's Wood on Dartmoor, following the Duchy of Cornwall, who revealed plans to regenerate the land and expand the woodland, doubling its size by 2040. And Wistman's Wood is an ancient oak woodland, lovely, covering 3 hectares on Dartmoor, Devon. Wistman's Wood will be working with its agricultural tenants, Natural England, and consulting to develop a landscape scale plan to bring about its increased resilience. And this famous, beautiful wood has inspired artists, poets and photographers for a very, very long time, hundreds, nay, thousands of years. And there will be many sustainability projects coming up that William will have an involvement in. So it's heartwarming and sexy to see him out and about in nature. It's sexy. I want to see more of this while he is in his role as the Prince of Wales. More natural world. I want these links that royalty have always had to continue with the natural world, with the countryside, with the equestrian world, horses. Welcome to Tip Jar Corner, everybody. I think most of the finds that I will present to you today came from the local charity shop Cancer Research. So that's where I did most of the finding. Some of you have asked for tips. Which shop in particular, where do I go? Well, I go to quite a selection all over town and further afield. So I can't give you, I'm afraid, a tip because there's not one place that continually yields. Sometimes, for example, this Cancer Research where I picked up most of the items today has been quite threadbare over the last 2 or 3 months, and there's only been 1 or 2 things that have been worth picking up. I happened to go in last week and it yielded fruit there, quite a bit of fruit, so I couldn't name one particular place. And yes, I have developed an eye, but I do scamper about to lots of these places and pop in, and sometimes there's nothing there, but other days there's more juicy stuff. But I have developed, I can't tell you how to get an eye, but it's through the doing it that I've worked out rather quickly what's going to work and what's not. I'm quite quick. I like to get in and out, and I will be able to see, this just jumped out at me, but things just begin jumping out after you've had some successes and some mistakes. But we'll start with this vintage necklace. This is the only one that I couldn't remember if I've shown you before. I don't think I have, but it's very shimmering, gorgeous scalloped threads that drape around the throat. And it's particularly brilliant, particularly dazzling. It's a mixture of tiny round little gems and crispy oblongs, and it really throws the light and glimmers. So you'll see that coming up in a broadcast soon. I was going to wear it in the last broadcast, but sometimes you put it together and you think, actually, that's too much, and I decided to be free of adornment to the neck. Sometimes one has to be tough on oneself, and then there are days like today when it's a free-for-all. This brooch was £3, very dainty. I think it's going to be nice for winter, because it has almost a snowflakey, snowy look, doesn't it? Lustrous pearls and a cluster studded with diamonds. Small pins and delicate flowers with 5 petals each. A glimmering fancy. If only the diamonds were real. And this book that I picked up, I have yet to read. No idea if it's good or not, but it was going for £1.99, so I thought I'd check it out. You Look Awfully Like the Queen. Wit and Wisdom from the House of Windsor by Thomas Blakey. And at first glance it seems to be full of little gossipy tidbits about royal life, and there are some rather charming little illustrations inside as well. In this affectionate tribute, Thomas Blakey has gathered together a compendium of stories, many never published before, which provide access to a unique world. How exactly does a queen react when she finds her footmen draped in her jewels? What does she do to amuse herself as she whiles away the hours sitting for her portrait? And how did the Duchess of Windsor and the Queen Mother really get on? This beautifully illustrated book answers these questions and poses many more in its affectionate celebration of the diverse personalities of the House of Windsor. Diverse? How can you call them all diverse? It's a terribly white balcony. There's no diversity. It's a terribly, terribly white balcony. And I'm being cheeky, I'm being naughty, but you wouldn't think that they would dare put the name diversity into an all-white, all-English, all-old family, would you? Well, according to this book, it does. And there are lots of tidbits inside. When homophobia was raging in the press in the early 1980s, the Queen Mother whispered to a friend before a palace dinner, "We think they're marvellous. And besides, if we didn't have any here, we'd have to go self-service." Diana Cooper, the socialite and beauty, was immensely short-sighted and quite used to sustaining conversation with people she couldn't recognise, even though they plainly knew her. But on one occasion she got a shock. She found herself talking to a small woman who was most solicitous, and alarmingly seemed to know her well. Only by dint of much squinting and peering, which I'm doing now because I ain't got my spectacles on, did she manage to make out that it was the Queen. Amidst gales of apology and belated curtsying, she said, "I'm so sorry, I didn't recognise you without your crown on." A woman who had just been splattered with mud by the passing royal car shouted at its occupants. "I quite agree with you, madam," said the Queen. The Duke of Edinburgh, who had not heard the woman's remark, asked his wife what she had said. "Bastards," said the Queen simply. This orange cup and saucer next to me, I hope you can see it there. Yes, that was a lovely find. Cheery, bright tomato orange with gold trim. It's an elegant shape with an unusual colour, isn't it, for that style? It almost throws off a 70s vibe with that orange. And the saucer is gently scalloped. It was just £3.50, so I couldn't resist. I thought it was rather juicy looking, although I can't really imagine drinking out of it. You know that I've spoken to you before how each vessel I use is carefully selected to go with various drinks. Because I'm very sensitive to this kind of thing, and I find that the drinks or the potions taste different depending on the colour, the style, the character of the piece. I'm very particular about this, and I can't quite imagine what would taste good out of that. But I did think perhaps if I was to ever have, hot chocolate that's flavoured with orange, chocolate orange that's hot, I think that would taste rather nice out of it. I think that would do the trick. But anything else, I'm not quite so sure. It's just too orange. But we'll see. We'll find out in time. And speaking about oranges, I just wanted to show you a little habit of mine that I've picked up. A friend bought me, which one was it? I don't think it's one of these. A friend bought me one of these kind of soaps for a birthday last year. And you can find them in places like TK Maxx, and they have a big wall of them. They go for about £2.99, something like this, all the way up. And I never used the soap, I must confess, but I found a different function for it, which is I find them quite comforting to sniff, because some of them smell very good, and they bring a fragrance to the air, I find. So I would keep one on my dressing table, actually. Firstly, because I enjoy the aesthetics of the wrapper. They're beautifully designed. And they come in all kinds of fruits. There's also things like lavender and sage and all the rest of the kind of herbaceous plants, whatever it is. I like the juicy, fruity ones. And I love the artwork. I think they're things of beauty, these rather cheap soap bars. And they smell good, and I pick them up for a sniff here and there, and sometimes I even have one next to my bed because it sort of scents the air. It's just become a little habit of mine to pick one up every so often when I go in, and I've almost created a sort of fruit bowl of soap bars, and they look very nice. They look quite attractive, and they're very good in guest rooms and for the bathroom. Really nice, and I've really got no intention of actually using the soap, but you never know, but just to perfume the air and also as a visual treat. This one is a Sorrento orange. This one is a Sicilian citrus. Wasn't so keen on the smell of that one actually, but I like the aesthetics of it. This one I tore open, but it's a fresh lemon made in Portugal. So I like the oranges and the lemons, this kind of thing. Some of them smell better than others, and over time they just start smelling of glycerin, which in itself is actually not a bad smell, and it's kind of nostalgic. But yes, I just thought I'd let you into one of my new odd hobbies, which is collecting these. There's a cherry one that I want to get as well, because I only allow myself one when I pop in there. Don't want to get too carried away, but next time I'm going to get a cherry one. But yes, I enjoy that, and I enjoy pairing them together. You know about my obsession with colour, don't you? My obsession with colour, with pairing different colours together, seeing what we come up with. For example, I've got here the orange saucer and a blue gem, the orange and blue, because they change the character and the nature of what you're seeing. The visuals give us some juice. I'm obsessed with colour, I'm obsessed with words, and I was quite on the theme of my obsession with both colours and words. It came to the subject of the word turquoise, which many of you will say turquoise. And I mention this because I did use the word turquoise once in a broadcast and somebody picked me up on it. Well, the reason I used turquoise because my very favourite, I would say, teacher at primary school was a lady called Mrs. Wood. I'm not sure where she was from, but originally I think she was from the north. She had a slight northern twang to her accent. She was very strict, but I was one of her favourites. That was a theme with me, actually. There were some strict teachers throughout my life, which everybody was very afraid of, but I managed to ingratiate myself into their favour by behaving like a goody-goody when it suited me. Not for every teacher. But I rather liked the ones that had a sense of discipline, and I suppose I was a little bit of a sneak. But I loved Mrs. Wood. Her favourite colour was what she used to call yucky green. Yucky green, or was it mucky? I think it was mucky green, or murky green. Oh, it's gone from my memory. Mucky, murky, yucky. I'm going to go with yucky. I think it was yucky green, which was a kind of olivey browny colour. She loved it. That was her favourite colour. She came back from a visit to Mount Vesuvius with the most gorgeous ring. If I could have any ring in the world right now, it'd probably be that. It was made out of either the lava or some sort of effusiveness that had come out of Mount Vesuvius, and it had been made into glittering, iridescent, hologrammatic looking crystals on this sort of cluster ring. It fascinated me. Fascinating. You know, these things grab you, don't they, in childhood? I just stare at it. I absolutely loved it. But she would also talk about her visits to Egypt. And while she was in Egypt, she had, I guess, been finding out about the lapis lazuli, the golds of the pharaohs. She would teach us about ancient Egypt, the kings of yore from Egypt. And she would also talk about the stones, such as turquoise, and the powder paint in the shade turquoise. And she said, whatever anybody tells you, it's turquoise, not turquoise. Well, as it turns out, she is the only person I've ever met that pronounces it turquoise. Not that I've heard that many people pronounce it. It's quite rare to hear anybody say it. Everybody says turquoise, but I kept on saying turquoise because that's how Mrs. Wood taught me. So I sound extremely pretentious whenever I come out with it, and everyone looks at me rather oddly. Well, I happened to chance upon a charming vignette on YouTube that I really recommend you to watch. It's wonderful. It's the portrait of a home with Barbara Cartland. And for those that don't know, her daughter was Rain Spencer. And of course, she was an extremely prolific writer. She sold 750 million books. Well, this piece is narrated by her granddaughter, Charlotte de Carcacci, I think I've written there. Lovely narrator. She narrates this piece, and during it she tells us about Barbara Cartland's bedroom. And she says, "This is my grandmother's bedroom, with the same turquoise and coral colour suite that she loved." And my ears just pricked up at the mention of it. That's the first time I've heard anybody, aside from Mrs. Wood, pronounce it as turquoise. And I thought, well, if it's good enough for Barbara Cartland, Dame Barbara Cartland's granddaughter, to call it, who would obviously have been influenced by Barbara Cartland, and it's very much good enough for me, so I will say it, pronounce it unabashedly that way. From now on, it will always be turquoise to me, my dear, always. Turquoise? How common, my dear. How common. Rather like chinoiserie, I don't know, turquoise, my dear. So it must be an antiquated version of the pronunciation, but I love it, and I also loved being introduced to the turquoise and coral colour scheme. How lovely, and how very Barbara Cartland to be so particular about the pairing of colours together to enhance the mood that she wanted to reflect. And looking through her house, as you get to see in this piece, Camfield Place, which is an extraordinary house, which is created out of Barbara Cartland's imagination. It is all about her vivid romantic imagination, a wonderful cacophony of colours and textures and memory and art and flounciness and fondant fancy. Camfield Place was a haven and a summer home for the young Beatrix Potter, who, because it was once owned by her grandparents, and the ground inspired the tales of Peter Rabbit, this kind of thing. But I found it very inspiring, and I thought it was oh so apt to mention in Tip Jar Corner, because she was one that adored that dressing up box of life. She did it her way, unapologetically, with that makeup towards the end of it. I mean, she was a lovely looking woman. She was fabulous. I watch interviews of her quite often on YouTube throughout all of her life. She's fascinating. And actually, the granddaughter says in one of these pieces that she thought that the only other person that had the same extension of energy around her as Barbara Cartland that she's ever met in her life. You might be surprised at this. Some of you won't like it. But she said the only one that reminds her of that energy was Oprah, because she went on to meet Oprah, and she said that Oprah has that same energy, drawing people in. Here we have another rendition in pink. This approaches a salmon sort of pink, this blouse, which I picked up for £2.95. I haven't worn it yet. It was by Bellino of London, Paris and Rome, the height of glamour, I am sure, with vertical pleats and a necktie. And this jacket that I picked up, I'm so pleased with. I spent more than I normally would. It was £15, 15 whole pounds, but how could I resist? It was from Cancer Research, so like everything, the money goes to charity, and I know I'll wear this one again and again on the broadcast because it's so comfortable to wear. I love the colouring. I know some of you will loathe it, but I think some of you will see the fun in it. It reminds me a little bit of a magician that my parents used to hire for all of our birthdays. Fabulous. Penelope, her name was, and she would wear this kind of 80s affair, leftover, a relic, would you say, from the 80s or early 90s? I'm not quite sure, but it's got shoulder pads. It's what I call jazzy, very jazzy. Actually, it reminds me of some Miami friends of my mother. My mother spends a lot of time in Miami. It's one of her, if not the favourite place of hers in the world. She's got lots of friends there that put her up in fabulous penthouses, and some of them do have a certain style that harks back to the 1980s, and they have shoulder pads and black leather pants and these sort of jazzy affairs with piano notes and keyboards over them, this kind of thing. I'm thinking about one particular eccentric, very rich woman, a fabulous woman actually, with a bit of the old Patsy Stone about her. I'm thinking of her in mind. But yes, entirely made of silk, made in Korea. Jerry Sherman, it says on the label, Jerry Sherman. Just the most perfect name for it, isn't it? It has a red lining, which I think is wonderful, and it has the word rouge all over it. So how could I resist? It has that cocktail feel, doesn't it? Cocktail feel, glamorous ladies, glitzy, brash primaries in a sort of abstract watercolour style. I just love it. Totally juicy and totally fruity. Not quite so juicy, and you've seen one of these with these dinner lady affairs, as I call them. Actually, this blue one puts me in mind of a dinner lady outfit. Well, blue gingham it is, and popper buttons. But what sold it to me was the collar, this wonderful collar that puts one in mind of Granny's embroidery or cross-stitch affair, doesn't it? Rather old-fashioned look. It won me over, and the label says Dream Crest. Dream Crest. And on the same day, though unrelated, I found this pink one, this shirt dress, and it doesn't seem quite as good quality. I mean, these were both only perhaps £2 or £3 anyway, I'm not quite sure. But it has white buttons, it has white trim, very synthetic in feel. Candy stripes, I like the candy stripes, made in China by a brand called Quoi. How would you say that? Quoi. Qua. And I'm sure that some of you are probably getting fed up of me flouncing around in these ladies' numbers that are rather old-fashioned and frocky. Well, what can I tell you? We will return to various looks and my smarter jackets, but it is all about being practical over the summer period. As you know, my dear, it can get awfully hot. Thankfully, it is not today, but it can get awfully hot. I've just been looking for loose-fitting, bright if I can, things that are easy to wear, and most of them just in charity shops just happen to be for women. It's so hard to find anything interesting that's designed for men, and I like to have fun and use my imagination. I mean, you try looking around British charity shops and finding anything for men that isn't black, white or grey, and it's usually beige. So, you know, one wants to have a bit of fun, so that involves whatever I want and the art of cross-dressing. Well, speaking of cross-dressing, this one I really thought everyone's just going to unsubscribe immediately from the channel when I wore this one, but thankfully you indulged it. It was the princess costume I wore recently. I couldn't believe when I picked this up. I couldn't believe I walked in and there it was. It was brand new because it comes with accessories, a crown on a headband. I actually thought it was for a child because it was tiny. I didn't think I'd be able to squeeze into it, but I found it for £5. I found it for £5. I brought it home and I did squeeze into it. I mean, it did look a bit tight on me, but it was perfectly comfortable actually. It was tight mainly around the shoulders, but I got into it. And it was actually very long, even for me, over 6'1" in height. It was quite long. And it's a satin gown, and I googled the make, Ibton Castle, and I found it on Amazon. It goes for £30. Well, I paid just £5 for it, brand new. I squeezed into a medium size, and it came with white gloves as well, and I think it's just absolutely delicious. I so enjoyed wearing it, this silly gown. Barbie core, I got some comments saying it's Barbie core. Yes, that's been coming up a lot in the press, hasn't it? There's a new Barbie film. It's the colour du jour at the moment, but I have worn that colour a lot in the past. I enjoy wearing it, and I really enjoyed wearing that. But the star of the show for me was actually the little blue brooch that came with it. Little plasticky blue brooch. Well, it is glass, but blue on gold. But I haven't got a brooch in that particular blue, so I'll be keeping that and re-wearing it. I thought it was lovely. Really lovely. So I would have probably paid nearly a £5 for the brooch alone anyway. So that was a fabulous find. I'll be able to hold on to that, re-wear it again and again. It has iridescent glitter, full pannier accents, gold trim and scalloped hem. It also comes in yellow and orange, just like my soapy oranges and lemons, the bells of St. Clement's. A little bit less exciting, but you'll see them pop up. This one was by Profile, a light peachy, pinky affair with dragonflies rendered in gold glitter and a small bar to the collar in gold. You'll have to keep watching to see whether I can find some sort of interesting way to dress it up and make it look any more fetching than it is. And also there is this flimsy blue and green tunic top that's really rather quite sheer, and it has a large floral print, quite tropical in feel, green leaves and blue flowers. Well, I really enjoyed having a cosy catch up with you. Thank you very much for dropping by. It is always a bit more challenging to get into the atmosphere of Tip Jar Corner during spring and summer, I find, because we always get cosy, don't we, in autumn and winter, and we look over the old books and stuff. But I enjoyed today's, I think, because it's a bit milder today here in the kingdom, and I enjoyed the haul. I hope you did too. It was quite varied, wasn't it? And it's always good to have a chinwag. So I will try and get this out tonight, because I know that many of you enjoy it. For a Sunday, it has that Antiques Roadshow sort of feel, doesn't it? But I've got lots of cobbling together to do, so let's see if I can get it done in time. But I appreciate your company. Thank you for dropping in, my dears. Thank you to anybody who sent a tip jar treat my way, and I will see you in the next broadcast. Toodle pip, my dears. Take care and stay royal.